not every day that we get someone in the room, especially here in New Orleans, who can share a lived, true experience of surviving a genocide, an attempted eradication of a group of people. Ann Levy is here, a survivor of the Holocaust, a child survivor of the Holocaust. Ann's story is beautifully gut-wrenching and wildly informative in terms of how she and her sister and her family came through a horrific experience, which I'll allow her to share, to live beautiful lives. There are only so many survivors left. Ann is one of 2 left in our community.
And wonderful to see such a diverse group here of young people. I've been thinking how to start my address here today because things are so different. It's been very hard to talk about my history, but as long as I'm able to, I will never stop because I'm almost a relic. You're not going to see or hear personal stories that you have heard with your own ears. And we need to listen, and we need to hear everybody's story. Our family story starts in 1939. I was 4.5 years old. I have a sister that's 2.5 years younger than me. And I'll be talking about my mother and father, my sister, and myself. We as a unit, a family that survived the Holocaust. How to begin? I was 4.5, I was happy, I always look forward to. My daughter asked me one day, what is my happiest memories that I have of my childhood? And my happiest memories were Sundays afternoon with my parents, going for ice cream and balloons. That was my happy childhood. But in 1939, it changed. Our whole world changed. The Germans attacked Poland. I was born in a large city in Poland, second largest city in Poland, spelled L-O-D-Z, Lodz. And I was just a happy kid. Remember, my parents taking me to movies, dressing me like Shirley Temple. But like I said, September 1st, all that changed. We lived in a large apartment building in Lodz, lived across the street from a very large, beautiful synagogue. And my first recollections of war is watching my parents looking out the windows and crying. And the reason they were crying is because outside were the Germans, outside the synagogue, the Germans were there. They had thrown all the prayer books and prayer shawls and everything that was important in our religion, being Jewish, all putting it in a heap in front of the synagogue and torching it and taking pictures and laughing at it and giving children candy as though it was something to celebrate. And this is when our lives changed completely. The thinking was that the war wouldn't last very long. And so my father, like many other men, ran away, and he ran towards Russia. He was trying to get away from the Germans because he knew he would be arrested. So he left us, and we were living in this big apartment building. And my first recollections are that there was the three of us left in the apartment. Next thing we knew, the Germans came in, gave my mother 2 hours to make sure that she changed the linens on the beds, that she set a table like you would for company, because the officers were moving into the building. And we, in turn, were going into the Lodge ghetto. I don't know how many of you have studied what a ghetto really was, but all it was the worst part of town, enclosed by barbed wire. And this is where all the Jews had to move to. We were there for a while. Like I say, 4.5 time didn't mean much, and I didn't know how long. But the next thing we knew is that a young man came into the ghetto. He had a picture of my mother. It turned out that my father had sent this young man, paid him to come and try to get us out so we could bring us to my father. Because by this time he found a job and he was working, but he wanted his family with him. So this young man hired a farmer with a wagon, and he proceeded to come, look for my mother. He found her, and they smuggled us out of the ghetto and into this wagon, and off we were going to see my father. They covered Lila and I with blankets in the bottom of the wagon. My mother and the driver were sitting up front. And maybe a day or two passed, and my sister Lila, who was 2.5, started running very high fever. And my mother had nothing, not even an aspirin to give her. And she panicked. And when she panicked, she told the driver, "Don't take me to my husband, but take me to Warsaw," which was the capital of Poland. And she wanted to go there because she had 2 brothers. One brother was an engineer in a hospital, and his wife was a doctor. So she figured she would get some help for my sister. As it turned out, we wound up in the Warsaw ghetto. And to me, I learned what hell on earth was really like. My mother always warned me, don't look out the window. Well, you know you don't listen to what your mother says. Not always. And I didn't. And I did look out the window. And those are the worst memories that I can close my eyes and see them for the rest of my life. Because by that time, the hunger, the cruelty of the Nazis was so evident. Looked out the window and you could see bodies actually dropping dead in the street. whether it was from hunger, whether it was from disease, but there they were. And what made such impression on me that I cannot forget it is that you would find two emaciated men pulling a cart, wooden cart, and they proceeded to pick up these bodies like you pick up pieces of wood and throw it on top of each other onto that cart. Or if they didn't get there yet, you would see this body that maybe had clothing on them, and you would see people walking by, and they would take the clothing off these bodies. And why? It wasn't because they were mean or spiteful. It was because whatever clothing they had on, they were dead. They no longer needed it. But the living, they needed a coat, they needed shoes, because we had none of that. We weren't allowed to take much with us when we were put to the ghettos, and so every piece of clothing was so important. And so seeing that, after seeing the burned books and everything else out of the synagogue, I learned what war was. The ghetto was, as I told you before, hell on earth. No food. To make an impression on you, think of what you used this morning when you got up. You were able to take a shower, you had towels, you had toothpaste, toothbrushes, toilet paper. How basic can you get? We had none of that. How do you survive without any of that? You survive by being in the midst of all kinds of illnesses and death. So Lila and I, by that time, we were suffering from malnutrition. And we were no longer running around, more or less just laying in a bed. We had one room that we were staying in. And one day there was a knock on the door, my mother answered, and she passed out. She passed out from shock because my father was standing in the doorway. Now what sane man would walk into the Warsaw ghetto when everybody was trying to get out? Our fortune was that he came back, because if he hadn't come back, I wouldn't be standing here today. And when he came back and saw the condition that Lila and I were in, he brought some bread and butter with him, and he realized what condition we were in, and he knew that our stomachs would no longer would be able to handle a whole slice of bread. So he took a slice of bread, cut it into little cubes, and handed us little at a time, a piece at a time. I always said like he would feed a bird. And this is how he brought us back to the living. In the ghetto, the Germans had established factories, and everybody, everybody had to work. So the factory that my father and mother went to work in was called Schultz's shop, and it was making wooden soles for the prisoners. In the beginning, they would take us with them to go to work because they were afraid of what would happen to Lyle and I. The Germans were always looking for the elderly, the sick, and children, Jewish children. So in the beginning, they took us with them and they would hide us among these wood soles because they were stacked, and we would crawl in and stay there all day until it was time to go back home to the room we had. But because the Germans were always looking and going through the houses to see who was left behind who didn't report to work, my parents were always thinking what to do next. And the next choice was, in that room, there was a piece of furniture like a dowry chest, maybe yay high. You lifted up the top and you could store things in it. And my father proceeded to make a false bottom. And in the morning, and he put in 2 little seats at the bottom. He left us a potty, left us with bread and water he had, and he would shove it against the wall in the morning when they went to work. And Lila and I would sit in that piece of furniture. There were times when we were sitting in the piece of furniture, and I must tell you, they always told us, you can't talk, you can't make any noise, and we knew why, how dangerous it was. So we didn't make any noise, and we didn't talk to each other. We just sat there. But there were times where you could hear the German soldiers coming up the steps, walking through the room, talking, and miraculously they left. Had they moved a piece of furniture, we would have been found. Had they brought the German shepherds with them, we would have been found. So, the night he was looking over us. Somebody was really looking after us. And then imagine my parents' feelings when they came home to see if we were still there. So things got worse and worse, and people were dying, and people were being taken away. People had to report to the Umschlagplatz, which was one big, like a football field, and they would have to go through selections, and it was random. You go to the right, you go to the left. To the right, you went to work. To the left, you were sent away on a train. And when my parents had to report to that, they instead left us in a cellar of a factory and left us there for safekeeping, hoping that they would come back and find us. And my parents went to that selection. This time there was an old grandfather, and he had his grandson, but he was deaf and mute, and all he could do is make noises, and Lila and I. And you could hear the German shepherd, the dogs, going around the perimeter of the factory to see if there was anything there. And when the grandfather heard that, this is something that also will never leave me, is that the grandfather wanted to save us because the boy was making strange noises and he was afraid we would be found. And he actually smothered the boy. And after 2 days, my parents came back and we were still there. And the miracle was that they both came back because families didn't have the chance of staying together. So as the progression went on and as more people were disappearing, the next thing my parents thought of what to do next. They were always one step ahead of the Germans. And this time they decided they would get false papers. We didn't have to change our name because Skrzydski was very Polish. We only spoke Polish. So they got some false papers and all they said was that we were Catholic. And the idea was that you needed 3 things. You needed papers that would say you were Catholic. You would have to have somebody, a Polish person that would take a chance of taking Jewish family in and keeping them. That was dangerous for everybody. And the third thing, how to get out of the ghetto. And with the help of the underground, my parents were able to accomplish all 3 things. The biggest question was how to get smugglers out of the ghetto. They were thinking of putting Lila and I into a German's officer's car, drug us and put us in the trunk and drive us out. And my mother said no, because what would happen if we cried or if we made a noise? So she wouldn't go along with that. The second choice was a garbage truck that they put us in to one morning, covered us up, and drove us out. And so there was the 3 of us that were going to get out.
You're great.
So the 3 of us left and went to live with this. It was a mother and daughter who took us in. While there, my sister being young, not knowing, being Jewish or not Jewish, I did know. I also had dark curly hair and olive complected. And Hitler decided that all Jews looked like that. So I had to hide. If there was a knock on the door, I would jump into what we call an armoire or a closet and stay there until company left. And don't kid yourself, they tried to change my looks. They tried to dye my hair. It didn't work. You are who you are, no matter how you try to hide it. So hiding was the only resource for me. The women were kind. They took a chance. And after a couple of weeks, my father was knocked out of the ghetto and joined us. And he had to find a job. So he got a job at a lumber yard. because his family was familiar with lumber. They had a lumber business. And so for lunch, he would come home because it was that close. And one day, first, my mother felt sorry for me because I wasn't getting any fresh air. So she decided she would put a kerchief on my head and just show maybe the face, not much of it, and let me sit on the balcony to get some fresh air at night. And one day, I did that maybe 2 nights, and one day the neighbor across the street came and warned the woman that we were staying with, "We know that you're hiding Jews here, and unless you report them, I will report you." And that would have been a death sentence for all of us. So when my father heard that, he went to his boss at the lumberyard, made an excuse that we had to move immediately, and had no place to go. Could he bring his family to the lumberyard, and he also could be a night watchman? And because he was good with his hands, and the boss liked him, he let him do it. So he built this primitive kind of room in the back of the lumberyard, and that's where we were living until the Allied forces started to bomb Warsaw. And when that happened, you could see all the people running out of the city and going into the countryside. And so my parents took a chance and said, we're going to, and kind of blended us in with all the other people that were running away from the city, and we wound up in the countryside. When we wound up in the countryside, my dad wasn't feeling well, and he stopped at a farm and asked the farmer if he could stay in a barn so he could recuperate. And then he talked to the farmer when he got better, and he said, "I'll work for you and I'll help you if we can stay on the farm." We stayed there, and we heard the bombing. We were hiding in the fields until one day it became very quiet. And all we saw was soldiers coming towards us. And as it turned out, they were Russians. So we were actually liberated by the Russians. But because my father knew what it was like to live under communism with the Russian rules, he knew that we couldn't survive under those circumstances. They went back to Lodz to check if they could find any family, any friends, or anybody, because you'd go to an office and register. And when my mother went and registered, and she told the woman, "Well, I have 2 children," they looked at her as though she was mad, because no children were coming back. We were an oddity in the system. They had to actually take us by the hand, bring us to the office to prove that we were truly alive. And since there was nothing left for us in Poland, we made our journey by foot, and we walked from Poland through Czechoslovakia to the border of Germany and Czechoslovakia. And the reason they wanted to go there is because that was the American zone where the Americans were in charge. Because the Americans had established DP camps. And all the Holocaust survivors went to all these different camps. And we wound up at the border where the Americans were, and when they heard that there was a Jewish family, they wanted to cross over. They actually put us on a truck and brought us into this little town, this little German hamlet. And I must tell you that even though it was German, that was the first time that I felt free. That I felt that I could walk around, that it didn't matter how I looked, that I could do what I wanted to do as a kid. We stayed in that little town for 4 years because that's how long it took to get papers to bring us to the United States. And my poor parents tried to make sure, because you had to go through all kinds of criteria and, make sure that my teeth were straight, so they got me braces. That my eyesight was good, so they got me glasses to make sure that we wouldn't be rejected, that we would be able to come. And like I said, after 4 years, when we got the papers, we made our way to Bremenhaven, Germany, port. And from there we took a boat, and the boat trip was horrendous because I was seasick. And I'm going to tell you a story that I regret to this day. And I think maybe y'all will get something out of it. I was in the infirmary by myself, dark. I had never seen a black person in my life. And I'm laying in the infirmary, and all of a sudden I open my eyes, and there's this black face looking me in the face. And I screamed. I screamed because I didn't know what was happening. I was by myself, sick, and all this poor soul was doing, he was a nurse, he was trying to help me. But when you're not familiar, when you're not exposed to other people, you scream. And I'm sorry about it to this day. We got on a boat. I was sick. The rest of my family was all right. But I also had a young brother that was born in Germany. So by the time we went on the boat, he was 11 months old. And we made our way, and we landed in New Orleans at the embarkation port. And the funny part of it is, we landed at the Poland Wharf. Irony, isn't it? I tell the story, but it's not easy. It brings back bad memories. I'm sure we all have our bad memories. But I'm going to bring it to today. I have never been so afraid living in the United States as I am today. You all are the future leaders of this country, of this city. And it's up to you whether you are interested or not, that you will say or say something when people deny the truth. You know, 20 years ago, we were saying the historians will change history and we won't know the truth. Well, we're dying off. We were the witnesses. The soldiers are dying off. We're all in the 80s, 90s, some 100. And it's so easy for people to lie today and tell you to your face, it didn't happen. How can you lie about history? Everybody's history. This is what you're supposed to learn. If you don't learn from history, you'll just repeat the same thing. So I'm really begging you all that as you get older, as you vote for your leaders, be careful who you vote for. People lie. And what bothers me today is that out and out lies that are incredible and people believe it. How do we fight that? I have no answers. I hope you all do. By getting along, by not judging each other how you look, what you do, what your religion is. You should learn by now that those things don't matter. It's the people that matter and the character of the people that matter. And we need more characters. We need more humanity. We forgot how to treat each other with humanity and politeness and be able to discuss things the way we should discuss without anger and just learning from each other. Thank you.